Hello and welcome to RachAquarelle. My name is Rachel, and this video is going to be the first in a series of videos that I'm going to be doing between now and Christmas, where each day I'm going to do a holiday or winter themed piece of artwork, whether it's some kind of greeting card or maybe a gift idea or just some kind of cute painting that fits in well with the holiday season. That's going to be kind of the theme over the next couple of weeks. And I'm going to make sure that these are really good in-depth tutorials. And also for this series, if there's a template for the design, I am going to be posting those and they'll be available for free. I have discovered a website called Gumroad where you can upload digital items. So if I make a template and I want you to be able to print it off at home, if you would like, you'll be able to access that for free. So far, I have only been using my Etsy shop to do things like that, but Etsy doesn't have any kind of option to give free downloads to people. So I was really happy to find out that there is an option for that, because I think, not everything needs to be about that. All right, and so you can see here, I've kind of sped up this part of the video. And so the only part that's really going to be sped up is just kind of this sketching part, because, I want you to be able to see the process that I go through when I do sketches and when I try to figure out a new design. But the tutorial really comes into play just with basically the painting techniques. So I am just going to kind of keep any sketching I do in these videos sped up a little bit, just so you get a little behind the scenes look at that. But yeah. So anyway, I decided for this first little painting, it would be kind of Thanksgiving themed, since yesterday was Thanksgiving. And actually I started this yesterday. I got up in the morning and I thought that I could get this really kind of simple and fun idea down and started and recorded all before Thanksgiving dinner, but that didn't happen. I did get most of it done before I left for Thanksgiving, but I actually had to finish the rest of it today. So sometimes that happens. And my idea here was that I wanted it to be a turkey, of course, but I wanted to make it kind of a folk style turkey. So lots of embellishments and simple patterns. And also I'm gonna just go ahead as usual and apologize for any background noise that you hear. My dogs are on a rampage today and I just cannot get them to settle down. And I'm just trying to do the best I can. They're kind of crazy. Anyway, so I really like folk art, and I just think it's, I guess I don't really know a lot about it other than it's just like so beautiful and kind of simple in a way, and also intricate in a way, like simple and intricate. Like there's so many simple patterns and embellishments, and they come together to kind of create a really almost complex and delicate design, and I really like that. So that's kind of what I wanted to bring to this turkey, and I wanted to try some different ways of painting than what I typically do. So the sketch I did is not going to be the end-all be-all for the design of this turkey. I ended up doing a lot of things quite differently in the actual final result, and you can see I'm breaking some of my own rules and actually erasing on my watercolor paper, just because I'm kind of thinking as I go and making changes as I go. So what I'll do for the template for this is I'm gonna create the template based on my actual final turkey. And so that is going to be linked in the description below. And again, that's going to be available for you for free. So if you go to that link, you'll be able to download that template. You'll be able to print it off at home. You can resize it to whatever size you want. And then if you have either like a light box or transfer paper or whatever you want to use, I like to use transfer paper, then you can just transfer this design right onto your own paper. And, you know, the way that I paint it is just one way to do it. And of course, you know, every time I do something that's kind of new and out of the ordinary for me, it's always kind of experimental. So of course, there's things I already wish I had done a little bit differently with my painting. So I'll talk a little bit about that as I go. And right now, while I'm still kind of just sketching out this design, I'll tell you a little bit about the materials that I'll be using for this painting. So I'm going to use a very, very limited palette of color. I'm going to use my Hansa yellow, my Pyrrole red, and my Payne's gray, and that is it. At a later point in the painting, like the final details, I will use some white gouache, but I'll mix the white gouache in with those 3 colors. So it's going to be a very simple color palette. I'm going to be using masking fluid. I'll be using one of my masking fluid applicators I don't think I've demonstrated yet on my channel. However, I did realize that when I was actually applying my masking fluid, my camera was out of focus, so it's not going to be super helpful. But this is the applicator, and you can adjust the width, and so that allows you to kind of determine how thick you want the masking fluid to be applied. So you just use this little knob to either make it a little bit smaller and finer or wider. And I'm using mine pretty fine. And basically what I'm doing is I am outlining the turkey, and I'm also separating out some of the distinct sections of the turkey because I just wanted to have some white space in between the different segments of the turkey that I kind of divided it into as I was doing the design. And so all you do is you dip that applicator into your masking fluid, and then you can just use it to basically draw with the masking fluid onto your paper, and it makes a really nice uniform line. It's a lot better than the little silicone applicators that I use sometimes in terms of getting a really nice clean line. It does take a little bit of getting used to, and you can see I have to dip it into the masking fluid and reload it quite frequently. But once you kind of get the hang of it, it's really a great tool. And I'm just cleaning it off there, and this is when I'm realizing that my camera was out of focus this whole time. What a bummer. And I'm just going to show you what the masking fluid looks like so you can kind of get a better idea where I placed it. So not along every detail, of course, but just kind of separating the major segments of this turkey. And there's some of it that's still quite wet, so I'm going to have to wait for that to dry entirely before I do any kind of painting at all. And basically what I want to do is use the 3 colors, so the Hansa yellow, the Pyrrole red, and the Payne's gray. And the first step that I will do is just to kind of apply a nice wet on wet wash. I'm going to start with my lightest and brightest color, so the Hansa yellow. And I just want to apply this in a way that kind of makes sense for a turkey, and I do have a photo reference just from like a Google search in front of me while I'm painting this. So I kind of just generally want to get the coloration somewhat lifelike, if that makes any sense, even though I'm not using realistic colors by any means, but there's parts of the turkey that are a little bit lighter or, you know, kind of like a beige color. I'm sort of interpreting that as yellow. There's areas that are a little bit more orange, so that's where I'm putting splashes of red. And then any area on the turkey that's just darker, that's where I'm going to be applying the Payne's gray. And I just want my colors to kind of merge together. And I'll do a little bit of glazing, but not too much. This is mostly just going to be a wet into wet wash where these colors all just come together, and this is going to basically be the foundation on top of which I can paint all of the little patterns and embellishments. And the way that I like to work with watercolor, again, I like to start with the lightest and brightest color, so the yellow, and then red, and then I'll be working more with the Payne's gray last. And this is a stage where you really should just kind of loosen up and have fun with it and not worry too much about the outcome, because really what we want is just kind of a light wash of colors that we can build on top of. And in some areas I will apply it pretty dark, pretty bold. I think maybe that's one thing I would change if I were going to do this again, which I might. And I always kind of say that, but it doesn't always happen. Especially for something like this where I feel like it's kind of a one-off project. And I don't hate the way it turned out, but there are some definite things that I would do differently, so I will kind of mention those as we go along here. And what I really like about the masking fluid is that even though I'm wanting my colors to really merge and bleed together, there's sometimes, like right here on this wing, where I don't want colors to merge together. I want there to be a really good separation between this Payne's gray and the yellow, red, and orange in the upper part of that wing. So I have some masking fluid just kind of blocking that off. So even though all of this paint is very wet and very watery, I do have some control as far as where I'm merging things and where I'm not. And one thing that I really like about this color palette is that even though it's very simple, it's just a yellow, a red, and then Payne's gray is kind of just like a cool neutral. I like all the different color variations I can get with it. So if I mix the Payne's gray with the red, I get kind of a violet that's a little bit earthy, and I really like that. And if I mix the Payne's gray with the Hansa yellow, I get a little bit of a greenish color, which is kind of nice. And then of course the red and yellow makes orange. So even though it's a very simple color palette and just 3 colors, there's a lot of opportunity to get really nuanced colors, and I really enjoy that. And I really think that the best way to get used to colors and mixing is to just really kind of limit yourself to maybe just 3 colors at a time. Get really used to the properties of those colors before you even move on to a different simplified palette. And I've just found that it makes you a lot more flexible in how you use color. You don't think that you have to have a particular color to do every single thing, and you learn to improvise a lot. So I definitely encourage that. I really enjoy doing that, and it also just makes painting, in my opinion, a little bit more enjoyable because there's less decisions that you have to make, and you also get a more unique outcome. It's often something I really couldn't have even expected. So I've got most of this wash laid down. Right now I'm just kind of fiddling with things, softening up some edges, brightening things up just a little bit by dropping in more pigment in areas that I think need it. And I'm starting to think of, the different ways in which I'm going to add the embellishments and patterns on top of this wash. So in some areas, I'll be able to get away with just using more watercolor that just is a lot more pigmented and concentrated. And then in other areas where it's already really dark, I'll use gouache and mix that in with these same colors so that I can get some of those embellishments to actually be lighter. And for the turkey's head, in the photo, it was kind of like an iridescent green. So what I'm going to do is put down a layer of Payne's gray, and I'll let that dry, and then I'll glaze over it with some really nice bright Hansa yellow, and that'll make that look really nice. And I'm also going to try to just stick with these 2 brushes right here. So, and I think at this point I'll probably mainly be sticking with this really small brush. The larger round brush was good for kind of dropping in large areas of wash, but for the embellishments I definitely want to have a much smaller brush, a finer point. Another thing I really like about folk art is that, when you have animals or even people, they're always so simplified, but not in a way that is like cartoonish or goofy. I don't really know how to describe it, but it's almost like simplifying the forms into really symbolic shapes, really blocky shapes. So now I'm starting to add some of the design features in areas where the wash is completely dry, because I'm waiting for, well, I know I'm waiting for the head to dry so I can add yellow on top of it as a glaze. So I'm just kind of looking for things to do while I wait for that. And I find that I do that a lot with watercolor, which makes it a little bit difficult sometimes to really explain the process, because I feel like I kind of go back and forth on different things, and it's usually just a matter of, I'm waiting for one thing to dry, so what can I do in the meantime? And then I'll just start kind of moving ahead, even though I'm not quite to that part of the process just yet. So yeah, sometimes it's just a matter of looking for things to do. And honestly, sometimes I think it would be better if I just got up and found something to distract myself with, because a lot of times these little fiddling things that I do end up being what I don't like about the painting. So I think sometimes it's good just to get up and take a break, go eat some Thanksgiving dinner. All right, so now I'm applying this yellow glaze on top of that Payne's gray, and it's going to give me a really, really nice, satisfying green. Not overly green, very subtle, very earthy, and that's what I like about this palette. Even though it's really bright and unique, it's like, I don't know, I feel like I've really been fascinated with it lately just because it is fall. And I get such a nice fall palette from just these three colors. Now I'm adding a little yellow glaze on top of the Payne's gray on the wing too, so I can make that a little bit more of that subtle green. And when I'm starting to do a lot of these embellishments, what I'm doing a lot of the times is I'm getting pigment on my brush, and then if I feel like there's maybe just a little too much water on my brush, I'm just gently wiping off any excess water onto my paper towel. And that's just because some of these details are a little bit fine, and I want some nice fine lines in there. And so it's going to be important to have just kind of that nice balance between water and pigment, where it's not so much water that you're going to get a lot of spread and a lack of control, but you also want to have enough water where you're getting a nice flow, so it's not really dry brush. I want a nice solid line to just kind of easily flow off of the bristles. All right, so now I'm going in with some of the darker embellishments. And a lot of the embellishments that I did, I sort of came to them just by thinking of like plants, flowers, natural shapes. Some of the quote unquote feathers on the wing and in the tail, they're almost like a fish scale type thing, but still kind of just have that feel of stylized feathers, I guess. And so that's just kind of what I notice about folk art, is that a lot of the designs, embellishments, patterns are stylized versions of things in nature, or, parts of the actual subject that can just be interpreted a slightly different way. And I like to think of folk art too as almost like it has a quilted feel to it, because there's all these different parts and segments, and they're somewhat disjointed, but yet they come together to create a whole piece that just kind of feels nice and kind of feels quaint, I guess, is maybe the word I'm trying to think of. But yeah, it's all just very simple patterns, and then they all come together to create something that just feels a little bit more complex. And also, this is just kind of a fun thing to do, because you really can just kind of let your creativity fly and experiment with things And I don't know, I think really for the most part, you can try whatever you want and it's going to come together. I think the most important and most crucial part of this process was just getting a sketch and start thinking about the different patterns I wanted to use, because there were a couple of things that I tried when I was in the sketching phase that I just really wasn't happy with. So if I hadn't worked through some of those things ahead of time, I think this might have been a little more frustrating, like if I tried to just wing this from the get-go. But yeah, I mean, I'm a big advocate for sketching because it just helps so much and it makes the actual painting process so much more enjoyable. And now I'm getting pretty close to being finished with these embellishments that are just going to be dark, so mostly just the Payne's gray. I think I use a little bit of the Purell red on the tail feathers because those are pretty light. They're basically yellow and orange over there on the ends, so I can go over that quite easily with just some red. And I kind of made some flower patterns over here. And then once I'm finished with these darker embellishments, this is where I kind of took a break for the rest of the day. I went and had Thanksgiving, and by the time I got home, it was pretty late. So I just picked this up this morning, again, where I left off. And that's when I did a lot of the work where I mixed in some white gouache with these colors and did some light embellishments. So I did every other flower on the tail feathers with just red, and then I'm going to do the other ones with an orange, but the color difference isn't huge, so you probably won't even notice, especially from this point of view, that they're a little bit different. But that's kind of what I was going for, just a little bit of variation between those flowers on the tail feather. And then I left the centers just open, so some of that yellow and orange will just show through the centers. But I do go in with gouache and try to brighten those up a little bit, but honestly, it didn't really do too much. So I think that's one thing I would change, is I would just kind of leave those as is. Now I'm going to make the area around the eye just a little bit darker. Okay, and so this is where I'm going to leave it. Just going to let it completely dry, and then I'm going to be coming back with some white gouache and also some hot cocoa. Okay, so now it's the next day. I've got some clean water, I've got some hot cocoa, I've got a little candy cane. I'm in the holiday spirit and ready to finish up this turkey with some gouache. So there's already some gouache on my mixing palette. I'll drop some water on it in just a second so you will see where it is a little bit better. There it is. So that's gouache that was already on my palette from a couple of days ago. I really don't like using gouache when it has already dried up on my palette because it's not as easy to reactivate gouache as it is to reactivate watercolors. I'm not really sure exactly why that is, but what I usually try to do is just squeeze out the amount of gouache that I need for just one painting session. But the last time I squeezed out some gouache, I did squeeze out too much, and I just hate wasting anything. Even if it's, you know, the tiniest amount, I'm going to try to always use it. So at least at first, it was a little watery, a little more watery than I would really like it to be. But it's going to do the trick. And actually, I do want these effects to be somewhat subtle. I don't really need these little details to, you know, stand out or grab your attention. And so what will happen is as it dries, it won't show up quite as much. So I'm starting out with just my Payne's gray and gouache, and I'm painting in some of these dots on the chest of the turkey. And they're not all going to be the same color. as they move up through the body of the turkey, I'm going to just kind of shift the colors. So next I'm going to do yellow and a little bit of white gouache. And then I'll paint some segment of this area with these nice yellow dots. And then I will also do red with gouache more toward the top. And I decided to do that just because it's such a large area and there's really every color in the wash on the foundation of this area. So instead of just having all these dots one color, I decided to sort of match them up with the color I'm placing them on top of. And then adding some more of those kind of fish scale feathers along the tail with the yellow. And I'm kind of choosing which color to use just based on what will create enough contrast but not too much. So I'm going to do some of these lines with the yellow gouache, and then as I move over areas that are a little bit darker, a little more red, then I'll use red with gouache. And when you're using gouache, especially white gouache mixed with a color and you're using it to try to go over a darker area, you really just want to make sure that you have it opaque enough that it will actually give you a little bit of coverage. And that's why I say that it can be quite challenging to use gouache that's already dried up, because when it's dried up and it's reactivating very slowly and you can only grab a little bit of gouache at a time and you end up with too much water and it just looks sort of milky instead of opaque. So that is why I prefer just to try to use the gouache straight from the tube whenever possible. And this is such a small project too, and I knew that I wasn't going to need a lot of gouache, so I didn't want to, squeeze out more and then feel like I was wasting even more gouache. So just going to make do with what I've got. But it's really doing a lot with the red. It's really helping me get some really good coverage. I feel like with my brush, I'm really having to scrub into that gouache to pick much up off of it. And even though a lot of my pencil lines are probably not visible with the video, I can actually see all of those quite well, and so that's how I know where to put all these different little lines. And I gotta take hot cocoa breaks here and there. Usually when I'm painting and trying to drink, coffee or something, I either forget that I have a drink, even though it's right in front of me and kind of in my way, or, as everyone has probably done at one point or another, I end up dipping my brush into my drink. That's why I put my drink over on the left-hand side, because I'm used to having my paint water over on the upper right-hand side. So I find if I just put it somewhere that's a little bit more awkward for me to reach, I am much less likely to dip my paintbrush into my beverage. Okay, so now I'm going to mix some of the Payne's Gray, the red, in with some gouache to get kind of a nice purple or violet. I don't know. It's almost like a mauve, I think. It's a very interesting color and I really like it. And I'm going to use that here on this dark part of the wing. Now this is where, because I painted this so dark, I really can't see any of the marks that I made. So I am just, kind of going for it. And when I was doing my sketching, this is the part of the design that I was struggling with the most. I just couldn't decide what to embellish this area with, but I think overall I like how it turned out. It was a little bit tricky just to get enough coverage. Needed a lot more concentrated gouache to really cover that area. Although, you know, I mean, it turned out fine because I really don't need it to be a large amount of contrast in here. Sometimes I think subtle details do even more than kind of going all in and making everything really stark and bright and contrasty. And then there were just a few little spots in the tail feathers that I had missed, and I could see some pencil marks, so just touching that area up. You can barely tell that there's any gouache in this red. That red is so strong. It's almost like a cadmium red, but I don't think it has any cadmium in it. Yeah, just to get like a pink, I have to really go in heavy with the gouache because that red just kind of eats the white up. And then I'm going to put some kind of half flowers down here at the bottom of the wing. And these are going to be really tricky to make them show up. I'll go over them a couple of times, but ultimately I'm just going to have to leave them the way that they are. And here I go, trying to put on another coat just to make it show up a little bit better. And now that I'm watching this again, it really wasn't too bad on the first pass. I think maybe what was bothering me was it was a little bit splotchy and uneven. I can always tell when I'm at a point where I'm starting to kind of get a little too fixated on things because I start seeing my head poke into the shot. That's probably a sign that I needed to take a little break. And I'm mostly done with this at this point. I think there's probably just going to be a couple things I fiddle with a little bit. And really, the things that I would do differently, those things haven't really happened yet in this process. So it'll be when I'm using a pen, a black pen, to kind of go around everything. I wish I hadn't done that. And I'm honestly thinking of just scanning this painting and going into Photoshop and getting rid of all the black lines that I end up putting in here. I think that's really the major thing that I'm not happy with. I wish I would have just left. I wish I wouldn't have used any black ink on this at all. And originally that was my intention, was that this wasn't actually going to have any black ink on it. I do use a white gel pen, and that doesn't really bother me because I just did a few very minor things with it. But yeah, I think that I might actually go in, because I really liked how this turned out, and I just maybe want to go in and get rid of the black outlines that I add a little bit later. You live and learn, though. Sometimes leaving things simpler is just the way to go. Now I'm just kind of letting this dry, thinking about what I want to do next. Adding just a little bit of a line to these little legs. With a project like this, it's just so easy to get completely absorbed into it and to start looking for every opportunity to make some kind of small mark, whether I was planning it to begin with or not. And just adding a few bits of that red color. Am I done? Let's see. I'm taking a sip of my hot cocoa and thinking about it. A few smudges that were bothering me, but again, nothing that can't be fixed in Photoshop if need be. All right, so I guess I'm done with the painting and I'm going to remove the masking fluid. Now, this was crazy. I pretty much got all of this masking fluid off on one pull. That never happens. I could never plan for this to happen. I think there was just one little spot that was left after I did this one big pull. It's so satisfying. It's almost like when you have masking tape all around a painting and then you're finished painting and you finally take that masking tape off. It's just like so satisfying. I love it. So yeah, I really like how this looks right now. And I wish I could tell me to stop. So yeah, I'm just gonna clean things up a little bit, so I'll speed this up, I think. I always like to have a nice, clean workspace to come back to. And I'll leave there's just like the size of maybe half a pea of that gouache on there. I'm just gonna leave it. I gotta use it up. Can't just let it go to waste. And it seems like my wells got messy even though I barely used any space on here. Never fails, it seems. Okay, so now I've got my white gel pen and then I've got that micron pen. And the micron pen is very, very small. I think it was like the 005 size, which is the smallest one that I'm aware of. But I just wish I would have left it alone. I really only got it to do the eye. But then, as always, it's like, oh, I've got this utensil in my hand, so why not just keep using it? But the gel pen was pretty effective, I think, in some areas where I just wanted to add just some very, very small lines on these flowers on the tail feather, and then in a few other areas. And the gel pen is nice because even though it's pretty opaque, it's not like such a strong pen that it becomes a distraction. So it's good for little small details that, you know, can be a little bit scratchy or, you know, hit and miss a little bit. I definitely have a hard time getting like a perfectly smooth line with this gel pen when I'm going on top of watercolor. And I find that in areas where I try to use this gel pen on top of gouache, it's way less effective. Not really sure why that is. There must be something in gouache that is a little bit more resistant to taking ink on top of it, whereas watercolor I usually find is very easy to use a gel pen on top of it. And then I put just a little bit of white around the eye. And then my intention was just to use the black pen to fill in the eye. And then I ended up just doing a whole bunch of other things. But you can see, especially in these areas where I'm applying the white gel pen, you can see that it makes a difference, but it's not drastic. And that's what I really like about it. Because if I went overboard with this, I don't think it would be disastrous. All right, well, here I go. Here I go with this black pen. I could just stop the video and just pretend I actually stopped where I meant to, but let's be honest. We all go overboard, don't we? But, you know, you can see what I do with this and you can decide to do something different. Yeah, I don't know what I was thinking. It's like I did one outline and then I felt like I had to then go in and outline everything. And I knew it too. At this point, I'm sitting here, I'm thinking this was a big mistake. But I'm stuck. I have to go all the way now. Yeah, all these nice white separations. Just gone now. But overall, this was a really fun project, and I really liked just kind of getting engrossed into the process. And I hope that you enjoyed watching, and remember that the template will be free and it will be linked in the description. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you tomorrow.